My name is Rhianna Gonzales, and I'm representing the Commonwealth Youth Climate Change Network. And I'm very pleased to be participant of this workshop, considering that it was mainly on climate change and energy and the role of parliamentarians. I believe it's very important, especially for a young person, to participate in this workshop to see how parliamentarians actually get along in the work that they do and how they can actually improve. For me, it was really good because I got to actually give my point of view to parliamentarians into how many the challenges I see and some of the gaps that they actually have in their own traditional experience in being a parliamentarians. So for me, it was a good experience in that area. In terms of the Caribbean, because a lot of the Caribbean islands are actually dependent on external energy sources, it's very difficult to get energy and have it as freely available. Now, as a citizen of the Trinidad and Tobago, we are an energy dependent society. Our economy is dependent on oil and gas because we produce and export oil and gas. So for us, having energy, it's kind of both a hindrance and an opportunity for us because feasibility-wise, it is not best for us to really seek out renewable energy in terms of economy. It will cost us quite a bit. However, it does put us in a perfect opportunity to be an example to other countries to actually show that we can use renewable energy and diversify our economy, even though it's our major GDP income. As an island, we have a great source of solar energy. We have tried to put that forward in terms of using it as solar lighting systems for major parks and along our highways. But we've also looked at wind energy along our eastern coast because we have a very high level of wind in that area. And there have been a lot of research going into looking at ocean currents and tides for some using the ocean as energy as well. In terms of the larger Caribbean, I think Trinidad and Tobago is in a good position where we could possibly feed into the other countries as well to share our resource with them as well. And also to learn from the other islands like St. Lucia and Barbados who have actually looked at solar for solar heating and showers, and I can't remember it. But it's solar heating and lighting there, and that's something that we could really build upon because we have an opportunity here. I know for sure we would have to change our legislation and policy to allow for incentives to have our population actually buy into that type of resource because at this moment it is not financially viable to actually go and get solar panels and put it onto your housing because we have very cheap electricity here. As we have very cheap oil and gas, our transportation system is subsidized by the government. So for us, it's very difficult. And Trinidad and Tobago now being the second highest emitter of carbon in the Caribbean, it is something that we really need to work on. I know we at the climate conference in Paris right now, we actually submitted that we would like to reduce our carbon emissions by 15%. That is, I believe, 103 million tons of carbon. I think it's a bit ambitious, but it's still something that I believe it's going in the right direction. But we want to go through our transportation system and our power and electricity area. So energy is definitely an area that the Caribbean and Trinidad and Tobago has to focus on a lot to try and reduce our emissions in that area. And it will work side by side with helping mitigate some of the climate impacts that we actually have. Observing the mock committee hearing was actually a first for me to actually see how the parliamentarians would react into that situation. It was a learning experience in terms of the questions and answers, as the witnesses have to answer certain questions and be prepared, as well as the parliamentarians must be able to ask the right questions to get the information that they want. And that it's kind of tricky because sometimes you don't know what the right question is to get the answer that you want. So it's a learning experience, I believe, for the parliamentarians and as an observer, because it does help with everyday life as well. So even not necessarily for a project in that committee hearing type event, but even just asking yourself, is this something that you are willing to move forward with? I think for me, one of the issues I saw was that for these mock hearings or even a real hearing, it is definitely necessary to have persons of a broader base experience so that you have a less, how do you say, a less, I don't know, simple, I would say, but a less myopic type of discussion into one in one area. So it would be good to have, since this was green building and talking about energy efficiency, it would be good not just to have the project planner, but also maybe an environmentalist, an economist, a normal man on the street to get their word into how it's going to affect them, and if it's actually something that will be the country would be willing to accept. So I think that was one of the things I think was lacking, but it's something that was actually brought up as a gap in the committee hearing. So it was something that I believe the country should build on, and I think most of them thought it was something useful that they would like to move forward in their own countries. I think the role of a parliamentarian in the implementation of the SDG goals are very important because they are the decision makers. They are the ones who would push it forward into a national agenda. They would be the champions of the country to have all these goals being implemented. There are 17 goals that have been agreed upon, and no one government, one country could actually implement every single one of them. It is up to the parliamentarian to actually identify which is most pertinent, which is most important to their constituents, and push that forward in the national agenda and have it aligned with their national plans, and also be the person who ensures that there is inclusion at all levels of your society. So even vulnerable communities, young people, women, and disabled person, the parliamentarian is responsible or has a responsibility to ensure that all their voices are heard, to see what they want. I think that's something important as a role of a parliamentarian, to ensure inclusion and a top-down, a bottom-up approach in terms of implementing the SDGs. It's not just black and white paper pushing type. This is something that has to be done. Action has to be done. You need to go to your citizens. You need to find out what's going on. You need to educate them and let them know what the SDGs are, because I don't think right now most of the constituents of the Caribbean have no idea what the SDGs are and how it relates to them. And I think that's something important, because it will seem like a far off goal to them. Like, how does clean and renewable energy really relate to me? How does that affect my life? And it's the role of the parliamentarian to say, well, this affects your life in these ways. Reduce energy with the energy that we have right now. It is creating greenhouse gases, which is making climate change worse. What put it into a way that will affect them in terms of their kids, and their children need to grow up in to get clean air, to a right to just live in a clean environment. So I think it's their responsibility to put these issues and the impacts and the challenges, as well as solutions, on the table in a manner that young people and the normal population, the layman on the street, will be able to get on board, get buy-in, and have these SDGs implemented. Employ successful best practices on the SDGs. As I said before, it definitely has to do with inclusion, but also commitment and dedication to having the SDGs implemented, doing the proper research, and listening to the technical persons on the ground. I think that is very important, because sometimes, persons sign on to things without really realizing what they have signed on to and what it means. So research, getting education for the population, education for themselves, and also ensuring that there is proper accountability and transparency in whatever projects that they would like to move forward, and also ensuring that they have the financial backing through, if it's public-private partnerships, to move forward with these projects. So it's definitely a more holistic development in terms of implementing these SDGs. So it's not just that one government. You have to work with your different ministries. You have to work with your different NGOs and civil society. Work with your private sector, because they will all be affected. So once you bring everybody in that integrated approach to implementation, that is, I believe, one of the greatest and the best practice that anyone could actually do for implementation of the SDGs, because I think it is, I think one of the taglines they have is "no one is left behind." So I think that's something that we really need to focus on.